For the people whose church that is, what happened here is important not just for our American history, it's important for their lives now because of what they've just been used for without their permission. The Episcopal Bishop of Washington telling the Washington Post, quote, "I am outraged. I am the Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Washington and was not given even a courtesy call that they would be clearing the area with tear gas so they could use one of our churches as a prop." The rector of the church that was used by the president in this way, telling the Post he felt, quote, blindsided by the president's actions. Quote, "We want St. John's to be a space for grace, as a place where you can breathe," he said. "Being used as a prop, it really takes away from what we are trying to do." One seminarian and one priest who were cleared away from the area outside St. John's as the protesters were cleared out of there before the president marched over to do his photo op, wrote in a Facebook post after she had been cleared out of there that she is, quote, "now a force to be reckoned with." And then there was the presiding bishop of the entire Episcopal Church, the Most Reverend Michael Curry, who even if you're not an Episcopalian, you will recognize anyway from his presiding over the royal wedding in 2018 and his presiding over the beautiful funeral service for former President George H.W. Bush. Bishop Michael Curry is the head of the entire Episcopal Church. And after what happened with the tear gassing and the trampling of those protesters so the president could hold a photo op in front of an Episcopal church in Washington, last night, Bishop Curry has released this statement about the president's actions. Quote, "This evening, the president of the United States stood in front of St. John's Episcopal Church, lifted up a Bible, and had pictures of himself taken. In so doing, he used a church building and the Holy Bible for partisan political purposes. This was done in a time of deep hurt and pain in our country, and his action did nothing to help us or to heal us." Joining us now, I'm honored to say, is Bishop Michael Curry, who is the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church. Reverend Curry, thank you so much for being here tonight. It really is an honor to have this time with you. Thanks for making time, sir.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you.
Let me just ask you to give us your own context, your own understanding of what happened yesterday with St. John's and why you were moved to put out this sharply worded statement.
Well, the president went over to St. John's Church and took that picture holding a copy of the Bible and did so without as Bishop Buddy said, without the courtesy of even letting her know and the rector or pastor of the church. But even more important than that, he did that and took a picture. He didn't say a prayer. He didn't ask for God to bless and help the nation. He could have turned around, addressed the nation, and said, "You may agree or disagree with me, but tonight I want to ask all Americans in your own way, by your own faith, to pray for the healing of our nation. Pray that we may find solutions to our problems. Pray that we may find a way to love each other." The president could have used that in a positive spiritual and moral way. Instead, it was used as a matter of partisan politics and a photo op. And that is just simply, simply wrong.
Bishop, excuse me for interrupting there. Bishop Buddy has been upset about the use of the church in the same way that you have been, in the same way the rector, the pastor of that church has been. And I heard her articulate it in a way that felt sort of took my breath away. She said that what she believed the president was doing, and I'm going to paraphrase her, was to essentially clothe himself in the symbols of a faith, in the symbols of a religious tradition that were designed not to honor or make community with that faith or that religious tradition, but essentially to enhance his own authority, to build himself up, to essentially assume the power and the weight of those symbols for himself to try to aggrandize his own political power and standing. Hearing Bishop Buddy describe it that way, as I said, sort of took my breath away. And I wanted to posit that to you as to whether or not you think that's the way we ought to look at this.
Well, I'll tell you what, there's the outward form of religion, but it is the inward reality of it that makes all the difference. And holding up the Bible is one thing, but actually opening it and reading the New Testament and living by the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, who said, "Blessed are the peacemakers." You don't read "Blessed are the peacemakers" and then have tear gas fired on peaceful protesters. The Jesus who said, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." You don't do that and not allow people to exercise their rights as citizens to protest peacefully and lawfully. The Bible says, Jesus says very clearly, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. This is the supreme law of God. To love God and to love our neighbor, the supreme law of God. And to illustrate that, Jesus told the parable of the Good Samaritan. That's what's inside that Bible. That's the teachings of this Christian tradition. That's what the church stands for. To stand in front of it and not represent those values of love and justice and compassion and human decency, is to violate a basic principle of the Christian faith itself, represented by that Bible and represented by that church. And that's part of what the Bishop of Washington was getting at. Now, I would submit, Rachel, that we can do better than that. I would submit that it is time to move, for the president and for all of us to move to higher ground, which is what the Bible is about. There's a passage in the Bible that says, "Set me upon a rock that is higher than I." And we must go higher. We must claim the law in the way of love for each other, unselfish, sacrificial love, as the way in which we will help to bind this nation together, redress our wrongs, establish justice, and make this a land where there is equality and justice and decency for every human child of God.
Bishop Curry, let me just ask you one last thing while I have you here. We're watching live images of protests and sites of protests tonight, and it is amid this backdrop of the president threatening to and starting to use the U.S. military on domestic soil as against the American people, threatening to do so, bragging about how well armed they'll be. We've seen incredible violence. We've seen a lot of people hurt. We've seen people shot. We've seen people killed over these past 8 days. To people who just feel afraid for where things are going right now, do you have a message for people just in terms of people who worry about the course of the country right now?
To be sure, there is, as the old slaves would say, trouble in the land. There is no question about that. But there is, I believe, a fundamental moral order to the world in which we live that has been established by God when God saw everything he made and said it was good. That was a moral declaration. And I believe that in the end, if people of goodwill and human decency come together and say, we're going to be a people of love, we're going to be a people of compassion, we're going to be a people worthy of the name American, and then we will be a shining city upon a hill. If we, the majority, sometimes the silent majority, will stand up, speak up, and join hands together across racial differences, across religious, across sexual orientation, across all of our differences. Join hands as brothers and sisters and siblings, and let us stand up and make this nation a loving, decent, freedom-loving, justice-reigning nation. Make America that kind of nation, and then there will be peace in our streets.